Hi, I'm Alan Smith. In today's show, we're going to visit some spectacular plantations that over the centuries have evolved into beautiful gardens. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. You know, when I was growing up and we took summer family vacations, it seems like we always brought in some sort of historic site into our itinerary. We'd always look at some sort of plantation house when we were driving through the South. We'd go in the house and be full of all this beautiful furniture and silver and so forth. But you know, there wasn't much to the gardens in those days. But now that trend has changed. Today, homes are fading into beautiful backdrops dominated by gardens. And these landscapes are changing the way people are thinking about plantation life and historic plants. Among the plantations we'll be visiting today is Middleton Place in Charleston, South Carolina. The grounds at Middleton have been beautifully restored, and because of its 18th century origins, they boast the title of America's first landscape garden. There are similar stories to this all over the South, and we'll uncover some of the beautiful gardens in a quick tour of some plantations. We'll also catch up with a friend of mine at a historic home in Natchez. Award-winning chef Regina Charbonneau shares some of her delicious recipes from the pages of her cookbook in this historic setting. And while we're taking a look at some of those historic homes with beautiful gardens, I'll share some of my gardens past with some ideas for the future. But first, a whirlwind tour of plantation gardens right after the break. The first signs of spring for most of us are baby birds chirping, daffodils in bloom, and the sounds of tourists on the Natchez pilgrimage. Wait a second, what's this? Now, people are coming in droves to Natchez today, but there seems to be a precedent for that. I mean, this area attracted people long ago.
Oh yeah, well, it's on the Great River, so that's the highway of America, where everybody would travel up and down. It's been a big trading point all along.
Ron, the azalea and I should say the camellia are two plants that figure prominently in the landscapes here in Natchez and all the gardens. When's the first account of these plants? Because they're both foreign, they both come from the Far East.
Well, I know that in the 1830s and 40s, the day books of a Mrs. Turnbull at Rosedown Plantation, 60 miles south of here at St. Francisville, Louisiana, documents that she was planting oriental azaleas in her gardens there and tending them, again in the shade of the live oak trees that make the great alley up to the house. And visitors to Natchez in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s talked about the evergreen bushes that were here flowering that looked like the flowers had been enameled onto the greenery.
I guess they were talking about camellias.
It sure fits that description to my thinking. Rosalie has a garden that is the descendant of the garden that was there in the 19th century. And the Daughters of the American Revolution have done their part in recreating the parterre garden that shows up in the old maps at Rosalie. They've created it, in this case, out to one side. And it's a beautiful space.
Beautiful views of the river.
That's magnificent. The most wonderful thing about the sighting there are the views, I think, of the river.
A little later in the show, we'll stop by and see another Natchez gem, Monmouth Plantation, where my friend Regina Charbonneau shares some fantastic holiday fare. I had the opportunity to design the gardens of this lovely home, Marlsgate. It's a popular venue for weddings and receptions. When I create a garden, I try to think of it as an extension of the home, quite literally a garden room. Take Marlsgate Plantation as an example. Now that's an impressive residence, both in terms of its scale and formality. Well, the garden really should reflect these qualities. Let me show you what I mean. Here inside one of the garden rooms, you can see how the formality of the house is reflected in the garden. These tall, stately holly hedges create the walls of the garden room. And you have this chat path or gravel path that makes up the floor. the sky makes up the ceiling. And the embellishments, well, there are many. The boxwood parterres create visual interest and contain these beautiful grandiflora roses called Queen Elizabeth. We have a beautiful bust of Zeus on axis along the entire length of the garden. And there are also containers with boxwood. There are arches and benches. All of these are formal and reflect, again, the style of the house. You have to consider the landscape that Marlsgate sits in. It's the flat delta plain. Rich agricultural land swept right up to the house. And there was really no transition from the house into that landscape. And that's what the garden helped serve to accomplish. Color is important in every garden. And after the break, we'll take a look at a colorful spring display at a plantation in Charleston. If you're into historic gardens, it just naturally follows that you'd be interested in historic plants. One of the things I love to do to pass color on from one season to the next is to save seed, and that's what I'm doing here. It's just a time-honored method of perpetuating beauty in your garden. Now this is coxcomb or celosia, and I'm just shaking the seed out of the flower heads here, and it's dropping onto the newsprint, and I'll just take the newsprint up and then pour those seed into a baby jar like this. I also use old film canisters. They work great. Now, another plant that I save seed from in my garden is this one called Peruvian verbena, or verbena on a stick. And what's great about it is in the garden you can actually see through these long, slender stems. It's a see-through plant. It's transparent. This is absolutely the easiest plant you'll ever grow. Now take a look at this little beauty. This is a historic vine that you can grow from seed. It's hyacinth bean vine, and it's one that Thomas Jefferson grew in his garden at Monticello. I just love it because it's vigorous and it produces beautiful flowers and lots of them. I just save the seed pods, let them dry, hold the seed over winter, then plant them in the spring for a glorious display in the summer and fall. You know what's great about all three of these plants? You can grow them from seed, they're easy to grow, and they will bring your garden so much color you just can't believe it. Speaking of color, I had the good fortune to visit Middleton Place Plantation at the peak of azalea bloom. Sidney Frazier gave me a tour around the place. The azaleas are beautiful here today.
They are. I believe that we have somewhere around 200,000 azaleas in all different varieties.
My goodness. Well, the effect of seeing these azaleas in mass reflecting in the water is really unbelievable.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, you know, this time of year, when you can have these late cold snaps, everyone panics when
Yes.
the temperature is going to drop, and of course we all run out and throw sheets on our azaleas or plants at home. What do you all do here at Middleton Place?
It's impossible to try to cover and protect everything from the cold. But what we try to do here is just what's natural, try to keep the plant healthy. And when we do get these seasonal cold like this, hopefully the plant is healthy enough to go through it.
Yeah, well, whatever you're doing, it's certainly working because the plants all look beautiful and healthy. Now, in the 18th century, when this garden was first laid out, it looked quite a bit different than it does today, didn't it?
It surely did. If we were to look back through the window of yesterday, when Henry Middleton first laid out his garden in 1741, the garden was originally laid out to be a green garden, but as a different generation took place here at Middleton Place, they added different plant material. So I like to tell people that the Camellia japonicas came about 50 years after the garden was landscaped, and the azaleas came about 100 years after the garden was landscaped. So as we continue to add different plants to the gardens.
So the azaleas we see today really didn't arrive until the middle of the 19th century.
Exactly. That's when they came on.
You know, I live in a historic neighborhood in a home that dates from the turn of the century. Coming up, I'll tell you about the changes my house and garden have made over the years, and I'll give you some design ideas that you can apply to your garden. That's next, so stick around. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome back. In today's show, we're having a look at gardens with a past, specifically some beautiful old plantation homes. Now I'd like for you to go to my garden where I can share a little of its past. You see, I came across this house one day and I learned that they were actually going to pull it down. I couldn't believe it because it was a beautiful little colonial revival cottage. So I talked to the owners and they said, look, if you want the house, you can have it, but we want it off this lot. So I had to go find a vacant lot to move the house on. My dream was to create a garden around it. So eventually, I found a lot and set about moving the house into place. What a mess! This was no simple feat, I assure you. You see, I positioned it roughly in the center of the property because my big plan was to have a series of garden rooms that surrounded the home, creating almost a circuit around it. In all honesty, the gardens in the beginning were almost non-existent. In fact, the first year I spent most of my budget on restoring the house. I did very little in the garden, except grow a few flowers from seed. Eventually, I brought in structural plants like the holly hedges and boxwoods that helped to create bones and a framework in the garden. Now, I hope that some of these images are inspiring to you, because there's no shame in starting small or with a modest budget. I did, and you can see how it's grown over time. I'm often asked, so what's the future hold for your garden? Well, all I can say is that it's constantly evolving and changing, and that's one of the great pleasures of having it. Now let's answer some viewer mail. Now here's a good question. I have to be away on a business trip for over a week, and I don't know what to do with my houseplants. The last time I asked a friend to water, they overdid it and they all died. Any suggestions? Well, it is possible to kill your plants with kindness, which is exactly what your friend did. But hopefully these tips will help. If you don't plan to be away too long, you can help conserve moisture by placing the plants outside in a location out of the direct sun. This will slow down the growth of the plants and reduce the amount of water they need. Just place them in saucers and make sure they're well watered before you head out of town. Since you're going to be gone for only a week, why not put them outdoors and let Mother Nature be your plant sitter? Now for those house plants taken outside for the entire duration of the summer season, they'll always survive best if they're sunk, container and all, into the ground in a shady location where their roots can remain cool and where they're watered by a sprinkler. Oh, and one more thing. After being outside, it's possible that some of your houseplants might pick up a pest or two, like a spider, so spray them before bringing them inside again. Now, if you're really into houseplants, you can learn more about them by visiting my website. That's palensmith.com. There's also a newsletter that's free and full of seasonal tips, answers to viewer questions, and even recipes. And speaking of recipes, Regina Charbonneau is in the kitchen in Monmouth Plantation, cooking up something special for us. We'll visit with her after the break, so don't go away. A visit to Natchez, Mississippi isn't complete without me stopping by to see my good friend Regina Charbonneau. Now, Regina has cooked in kitchens from coast to coast, and the list of celebrities that call her down-home fare delicious is impressive. But I'm proud to say I knew Regina long before the big stars and have enjoyed being a guest at her table for more years than either of us care to count. During this visit, Regina is sharing some of the holiday recipes from her cookbook.
Well, you know, of course I'm prejudiced, but Monmouth is such a special place. It's just reeks of hospitality, and it's sincere. It's not contrived. It's true Southern hospitality.
Well, tell us, what do you have in store for this Christmas feast you've laid on?
Well, this Christmas, the first course is oyster stew. I've done a tomato aspic, but to give it a Natchez touch, I've done a kumquat and green tomato relish, which we'll cook. I'm going to give you the little insight on how to do that. And then the roast turkey, and done with anchovies, which is a little different. It's an old French recipe. And then, of course, served with the turkey, you have sweet potatoes, which we'll do with a bourbon and brown sugar glaze. And then my favorite dessert this time of year, it's a cranberry gingerbread cake with a cinnamon chantilly cream. And you can't have Christmas in Natchez without Natchez eggnog. So we have that prepared as well.
What a treat!
So I think you're really going to enjoy it.
What are we going to start with?
Well, we're going to do one of my favorites. It's a kumquat and green tomato relish, and I put it over the tomato aspic, which you know. But it's 4 ingredients, which is our common bond. We love things with 4 ingredients. We have sugar, kumquats, green tomato, and cider vinegar.
Sounds wonderful. Let's see how it all goes together.
Okay, it's really easy. It's the sugar and the kumquats.
How many kumquats go in?
It's a cup of cider vinegar, and then 3 cups of the green tomatoes.
3 cups of the tomatoes, I see. So after you stir it together, then what?
You just put it on the stove and you cook it down for 20 minutes until it reaches the syrupy stage. And do you want to have a little taste?
Oh,
It's
I'd
to
love
the
that,
perfect syrupy stage. Watch out, it might be a little hot.
Try it. That's great.
Now see what you'll do with that is this goes on the tomato aspic. So I take a silver tray and have the garnish it with bay leaves and put your individual aspics on the tray. And you can either do this in a bowl in the center or go ahead and spoon it over the top.
I see. That would be delicious on a lot of things. The flavors come together beautifully.
It's wonderful with grilled pork chops or pork roast. It's good with venison.
And just 4 ingredients.
That's it.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.